Have you ever watched a grandmaster play Blitz game? Doesn't it feel like they see the chessboard in slow motion? They spot tactics instantly and they pre-move checkmates, while the rest of us are wondering what just happened.
Okay, I guess I will go check. Oh, this is a beautiful checkmate, yes. Very nice. Very nice checkmate. Yep, very nice.
Well, the truth is, these grandmasters, they don't calculate everything from scratch over the board. They recognize patterns, checkmate patterns, that are engraved in their minds after years and years of training. And after you watch this video, you will not only start spotting these tactics, the tactics that you used to overlook, but you will start calculating much faster and spot these tactics almost instantly. So without further ado, let's jump into the first checkmate pattern. The first checkmate pattern that you need to know is what we call the back rank checkmate. This is what we call the back rank, and this checkmate only happens because this king is suffocated by its own pawns. Keep in mind, if black were to move and this rook was not on this rank, this would not be a checkmate. It's because this king has some luft. It can escape to h2. Of course, you might tell me, oh, this is very basic and it's like just common sense. Well, I'm gonna tell you that you're not gonna end up, you might end up with a similar position, but in reality, your positions are gonna be a little bit more complicated, and you will probably have to be a little bit creative to spot this checkmate. And that's why I have a couple of exercises for you regarding this checkmate. Of course, this checkmate doesn't have to be delivered by the rook. It could also be delivered by a queen. So the first example that I have for you, it's pretty similar. It looks similar to what we had. The only difference is this rook is now protecting or keeping this rank safe, making sure that this king doesn't get checkmated. So is the knight, right? So the queen doesn't or cannot go to e8. Well, let's for a second imagine that the rook and the knight are not there. You could deliver a checkmate with the queen, right? But how do you do that? You could pause the video if you would like to spend a minute or two to try to figure out how to checkmate. And the move is simply you just capture the knight. Your opponent might say, you don't realize that the rook is more precious than the knight. You'd say, I do realize that, but I realize that the king is the most important piece, and I've just given you a checkmate. Not so difficult, is it? How about the next exercise? Same concept. Imagine this king, so it cannot escape. It's being blocked by its own pawns. And let's imagine for a second that the bishop and the rook are no longer defending the king and the back rank. You could deliver a checkmate with this rook, for example. Well, you might ask me, how can I make this happen? Well, you have to get creative. And as long as you deliver a checkmate, it doesn't matter if you're down a queen or a rook or whatever. And with that piece of advice, you might be able to spot queen takes d7. Queen takes d7. Of course, the king cannot capture because this is protected by the rook. The rook captures. Now you play rook e8. Check. It's not checkmate yet because black could still block. Now it's a matter of personal taste. Do you want to checkmate with this rook or with that rook? It's up to you. And this is checkmate. This is the first checkmate pattern, the back rank checkmate. I would strongly advise that you do as many exercises and puzzles as possible for every one of the following checkmate patterns that I'm going to introduce. I would suggest that you start with this one, do at least 50 or 100 puzzles, as many as you can do. And once you feel like you have mastered this pattern, you move on to the next one. And the next one is what we call Boden's mate. It's a checkmate that involves two bishops. It's always going to be two bishops or two pieces that can deliver a checkmate diagonally. So the checkmate in this position is bishop a6. This is checkmate. These two bishops are slicing the king literally. And if this was a queen or this was a queen, it would also work because the queen could act as a bishop. Same thing, you're going to tell me, well, my opponent is not going to just walk into this, is not going to walk into a checkmate. I'm going to tell you, yes, you're right. It could happen, of course. Anything is possible in chess, but A more realistic example would be the following. You would like to give a checkmate because this bishop is kind of controlling all these squares and preventing the king from escaping, and the king is being suffocated by its own pieces. And this pattern, you will notice that it happens when your opponent castles long on the queen side. This is not a checkmate because this pawn could grab your bishop. How do you get rid of the pawn? This is what we call deflection. You capture with the rook. This is a brilliant move because your opponent has to capture. The king cannot go there because of the bishop, thanks to our bishop. So the pawn has to capture the rook. And on the next move, checkmate. Let's have a look at something that's a little bit more complicated. Let's imagine for a second that we could deliver a check. Like if you were to, let's say, modify the board, you have the possibility to change the board just like slightly. What would you change? I personally would remove these two pawns because this would be a checkmate. This is a check, and then the other bishop is cutting off the king. You don't have to edit the board. You can manifest this checkmate. You can pause the video if you would like to give it a try. The move is capturing the bishop using your rook. This is a check. Of course, black cannot move. Sorry, white, because the bishop is cutting off the king. This doesn't make sense because it's again check. So white has to capture with the pawn, right? And now you do the following. You give a check, but still, like, the pawn could capture your bishop, right? It can, but who cares? We're giving a checkmate. This is also a bishop in a way, a strong bishop. This is a checkmate. So this is the second pattern, Boden's mate. It involves a checkmate, or it's a checkmate that involves two bishops. Moving on to the third one, last but not least for this video, the Arabian Mate. Many believe that this is the oldest checkmate in chess. The Arabs were the ones to invent it. There are some scripts and documents of a chess puzzle that um, goes back thousands of years, and it's written in Arabic. It's basically a checkmate that involves the knight and the rook. This is a checkmate. Why is it a checkmate? The rook is protected by the knight. The rook is giving a check, but the king cannot escape because this knight is cutting off the king. Of course, this is not going to happen. Your opponent is not going to walk into the corner. That's why I have a little example for you. How can you deliver a checkmate in this position? You need a knight and a rook. This is one hint. It's checkmate in two moves. Feel free to pause the video if you would like to give it a try. The first move would be to give a check with the knight. Black cannot capture because this is pinned. We've explained this in one of the videos in the series from Zero to Hero. This is a pin, an absolute pin. You cannot capture this because your king would be threatened. So the king has no choice but to go to A8, sorry. And now this is checkmate. Same concept. It's a little bit more complicated, and of course, in this position, it feels amazing to spot such a checkmate because you're down a queen, and actually, I think a bishop and a pawn, which is quite a lot, but who cares? At the end, the main goal, or you win in chess by delivering a checkmate. So this is checkmate. Okay, another example that could be a little bit more challenging. Keep in mind, if you delivering a checkmate with the knight and the rook could work, but if you replace the rook with a queen, it could also work. Pause the video if you would like to give it a try. The checkmate is simply by sacrificing your queen. Black has to capture with the rook. The king cannot capture thanks to the knight. And now, where's the checkmate? The checkmate is rook b8. These are the most common, I would say, checkmates in chess. Of course, there are over 20 checkmates, and grandmasters and chess masters master all of them and practiced all of them, did thousands of puzzles. I would strongly recommend that you do a dozen of puzzles on each of these checkmate patterns, and once you feel you've completely mastered them and you started spotting them in your games, feel free to come to the next episode. In the next episode, I will explain 3 other checkmate patterns, and hopefully by the end of this series we would have covered all the checkmate patterns, which are a little bit over 20, I believe. That would be it for this time. Um, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And see you in the next one.